My name is Fiona Morris, and I am the Chief Exec and Creative Director of the space. I am a white, middle-aged woman with short brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a black and white striped shirt. Before I introduce our panelists, I just wanted to give you a bit of background on the space for those of you who haven't worked with us before, and also a little introduction as to why we wanted to host this panel today to talk about the importance of giving contemporary artists a platform to speak to mainstream audiences. The space is part of the Arts Council of England's national portfolio of organisations, and our primary role is to support artists and cultural organisations in exploring the use of new digital technologies in their art forms, and the use of digital platforms to help them talk to their existing audiences and to help them connect with wider communities of people online. We also deliver similar support working with arts organisations and artists in Scotland, supported by Creative Scotland. The space was set up in 2012, and over the last decade and a bit, we, along with everyone else, have witnessed the kind of worldwide explosion in digital media, and to paraphrase the YouTube setup slogan from 2005, the exponential growth in broadcast yourself video. That did provide, at the time, seemingly, an opportunity, an unimaginable opportunity before that, to democratise access to audiences from the hyperlocal to the global. What we've seen more recently, however, in the algorithm-driven echo chambers of social media and online content distribution is that access to all opportunity has become a harder and harder goal to reach. And that sort of brings me to the point of today's conversation. We felt that in the kind of noise, chaos, and soundbite culture that is endemic across digital media, we are increasingly aware of just how important the mainstream commentators and broadcasters, the clue's in the name, across all media platforms, TV, radio, and online, still are in diversifying and broadening audience reach for artists, and just as importantly, in ensuring that audiences are provided with a range of cultural experiences that they might be surprised by, they might be educated by, they might be really, frankly, annoyed by, or inspired by. And that is really, really important. And that should also include the opportunity to hear different perspectives from artists on contemporary issues. So this session is really about exploring the presence, or I have to say sadly, the absence of contemporary artists' voices in the mainstream discussion of current issues. Now, there are lots of challenges as to why that's happening. But I also think there are some opportunities that presents, and that's really what we wanted to focus on today. As an organisation, we regularly work with media partners in the UK and beyond, and we are completely aware of the increasingly difficult and challenging landscape they face across broadcast and the wider media sectors in securing their audiences. And if it's a hard landscape for them to navigate, then it's obviously even harder for artists to find their way through it. Added to that, the pressure on the financial ecosystem of broadcasting, whether that's because of reductions in advertising, challenges to public subsidy, or the fact that subscription models are not panning out the way that everyone expected them to, that has led to a significant reduction in programme commissioning across the factual landscape. So not just arts programming, all forms of factual programming are pretty much at an all-time low. But what that's done for the arts is to significantly impact on the opportunity or lack of opportunity for artists and cultural organisations to showcase their art forms on broadcast outlets. And I would suggest that some of that lack of profiling has translated into a quite significant reduction in the opportunities for artists, and let's face it, that's our modern day storytellers, I'm surrounded by them here, to be featured in wider programming as social and cultural commentators, in the opinion-forming slots on news and current affairs. Those sections of the media are still there, and they feature commentators from many sectors, but I can't remember the last time I heard an artist or a creative voice speaking to some of those subjects in those slots. And we think that that absence matters, and it diminishes us as a society as a whole. Artists have always offered us the opportunity for imagination, for vision, for hope, the ability to think differently, to challenge prevailing narratives, to bring visibility and emotional intelligence to divisive issues, to make the case for change, and possibly the most important one, to give power to marginalized voices. So in today's panel, we hope this is the start of an important conversation, by no means the end. And be clear, this is not about looking wistfully back on some idealized public service land in which all arts and culture was heralded, but forwards to actually thinking about the possibilities and the benefits for everyone in reimagining our partnerships from the cultural sector with the mainstream media. Considering what research we could undertake to develop ideas, to share strategies to help broker new conversations with partners from across the cultural, creative industries and media sectors. The new Labour government have said that they are committed to equality of access to arts and culture. And interestingly, this year it is 60 years since the first ever UK Minister for the Arts, Jenny Lee, presented her visionary government white paper on the importance and centrality of arts and culture in everyday life. In these challenging times, we believe the role of broadcast and digital technologies in providing artists with access to the mainstream audiences and offering those communities exposure to a wide range of cultural experiences is still incredibly important. And for a sector that is widely acknowledged to be a significant income generator for the UK, it also speaks volumes to the impact of the culture wars rhetoric that we no longer recognise and profile artists so that a new generation of potential creatives can see and aspire to pursue careers within the arts and cultural sector. Today we want to focus on the challenges for individual artists and storytellers, hence the panel here. Their voices and their work is not being featured in the way that it used to be, and it does seem to be decreasing. The public debate on the many and varied challenges confronting our communities, nations, and indeed the planet is almost entirely framed by social commentators, politicians, and journalists, with culture and cultural voices siphoned off into the sphere of entertainment, rather than being positioned as an integral part of how we think about and view the world around us. The work of the artists featured on the panel today is particularly relevant for these troubled times. Their work is grounded in important social issues, using their skills and creative imagination to raise awareness and promote empathy, activism, debate, and change in many differing ways. They're all creating brave, inspiring, and challenging work. All of them are interested in using digital and broadcast media to engage a broader cross-section of society. And all of them have an interest in making work, whether theatre, dance, fine art, other art forms are available, that connect the mainstream audience as well as to traditional arts followers. So in summary, as we face some of the biggest challenges of recent history with global conflicts, migration, and climate change set to change the ways in which we and the world operate, how can we help our storytellers and creators gain more of a voice in helping us shape the conversation and imagine the solutions? we will be hearing from the dynamic panel, i.e. you'll all be relieved. I'm going to shut up in a minute. We will be hearing from our panel shortly, but firstly, we just want to show you a video clip with some examples of the work they've made and the passions of these four.
Over the past 50 years, new groups of Iranian immigrants have come to the UK. Each wave of political turmoil washing up people, businesses, new kinds of food on our shores. I could tell you the whole of modern Iranian history by taking you for food in Persian restaurants up and down this country. We're used to thinking of countries like Iran as something far away, with a history that can be unclear or difficult to understand. But it's here, in our city.
I do wonder whether there was something that was really lovely about sort of playwriting when I was younger, because we sort of deal in the imperfections in our lives, but with writing, particularly at school, you're really forced to try and find the right words all the time, and you're marked on it. And I think that really stopped me for a while. And when I came back to playwriting, it just felt like such a beautiful way to be exploring humanity.
Great. Now let me do the introductions. And I'm sorry if I was blasting everyone out because I was doubling up on my lapel mic and the stick mic. So I would like to introduce Javad Alipoor, who is the founder and artistic director of the Javad Alipoor Company, theatre maker, performer, writer, all of the above and many other things besides. Cathy Mager, who is an artist, a curator, and a programmer, and welcome to her. And Corey Baker, who is choreographer, filmmaker, and creative artist, who is, well, the Corey Baker Dance Company is still based in the Midlands. This man is a citizen of the world now, travelling to earn his crust, and recently escaped the LA fires. To be here.
Yes, thank you.
And then on the screen, Laura, sorry, you're behind me, so I'm going to turn around. So Laura Horton, who has a performance tonight in Plymouth, hence she is not able to be with us here in person, but writer and playwright. So thank you for joining us here today. I've talked enough, so I'm just going to throw a question to each of you in turn that is specific to you and your work, and then I'd like to open it up into a sort of broader conversation. So Javad, I'm going to kick off with you. You obviously, your work is quite, it looks at politics, it looks at the way the modern world describes itself online, how people present their narratives online. So I would say, and we worked with you on the Believers Are But Brothers project that was looking at how the internet, in the echo chambers of the internet, are absolute feeding grounds for creation of extremism and ideologies there. I think your work, therefore, speaks to many different communities in many different contexts. But how is your work being perceived now? Have you sensed a change as to how you're being defined and described and how your work's being seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, our work has always struck a chord, like, which kind of ends up slightly generationally divided. So we made Believers Are But Brothers originally as a play before we adapted it for the BBC together in 2017, and that told the story of how young Muslim men from Europe were getting, let's say, radicalised, for want of a better word, on a certain kind of chat room, and compared that to basically how a bunch of white boys in the United States around things like Gamergate. What's interesting is when I say the word Gamergate, that divides the room in the same generational way that touring that show around the world would divide it, right? And divides it by how much people have been connected to a certain way of engaging with digital culture. So there's always been a part of our audience who I think have been excited to see that reflected in a way that hasn't been necessarily reflected in the arts and culture space. And a part of the audience who were like, okay, cool, this is interesting, you're showing me something. I think, you know, I'm not sure if this is something to be proud of, but I'm fairly sure that that project we worked on together was probably the first time the word incel was used on broadcast TV in this country. It was the time when you said that and people would still go, what? As opposed to you say that now and people go, oh, fucking hell, not again. Do you know what I mean? That's that sort of thing. But I suppose, for me, when I think, because our work is very political, and I think, you know, we're lucky that we tour internationally a lot, and you know, I sometimes say my company, internationalism is in our DNA. In English theatre, there's often a view that you should try and write the State of the Nation play. We always strive to make the State of the World show. And I think that internationalism gives us a certain view about how that space of the internet is shaping up at the minute. And if you've only got a foot in England and the US and France and, let's say, the richer countries of the world, you look at the past 10, 15 years and you look at the way that these new technologies and these new ways of interacting are fracturing our old identities and, frankly, speaking very frankly, accelerating and empowering some of the most, you know, the worst and most backwards kinds of politics in our corner of the world. But at the same time, if you're taking that international view, you know, I have Iranian heritage. It's also true that in Iran, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Ukraine, movements that are driven by a desire for exactly the same sense of social justice and democracy that in the richer countries we seem to be turning our backs on without a fight. They're given succor by those new ways that these technologies allow people to tell those kinds of stories from which one can create an identity. You know, I think that ultimately, to speak to what you were talking about there, Fiona, at the top of this, which is really, I think, such an important point. Ultimately, like, I think, you know, probably what we're living through in terms of public discussion about these things is a degradation of the complexity and the standard of public discussion that's being had about how the world's changing at precisely the moment when that complexity and that sophistication is most necessary. Artists have a very specific set of skills they can bring to the party. Like democracy, I hate to tell you this, is not going to be saved by artists and artists alone, but there is one specific and necessary thing that they do that they need to bring to the party. And funnily enough, when we talk about this digital technology moment, it just seems to me that, you know, that is fundamentally a story that is about the nature of storytelling. So to not have storytellers in that situation seems kind of bizarre to me.
Absolutely, and I think that's why in talking about it, I wanted to remind everybody that's what artists have done for millennia. They are the storytellers of our societies, and they reflect changes in identity, they reflect changing circumstances in a way that, you know, the government or journalists, you know, are not able to tell that story from that emotional perspective. And it feels to me like that is something that, you know, we're sadly lacking. Do you feel that you as I mean, I think we talked about this previously, but when a new show like Believers or Rich Kids of Instagram came out, you know, there was a willingness for journalists from different parts of the media to kind of go, oh, that's just an interesting story. Let me write about it as an interesting story of the world. But you were saying that you felt that now increasingly you're pushed to the arts columns.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's definitely true of our experience. So when we made Believers Are But Brothers, that was there was I feel like that's of a moment before the kind of worst onslaught of budget cutting in terms of print and broadcast media like arrived, you know, and before that sort of radical kind of cutting on what the limits of that kind of conversation and the amount of resource in terms of a longer conversation could be. So absolutely for sure, like when we made Believers Are But Brothers, that had a lot more traction within a non-arts bit of the media. When we made Things Hidden, which was, you know, ended up being about the struggle for democracy in Iran and how the Iranian regime try and murder and indeed do murder dissidents in Europe and America. We ended up opening that show, you know, through no design of our own, whilst the woman life freedom movement in Iran kicked off. And, you know, at that moment, I ended up being on Sky News talking about the woman life freedom movement to do with the bit of my life which is part of basically, you know, I've been part of solidarity groups that, you know, kind of put pressure on the Labour Party and try and do foreign policy wonkery and try and get people to be on the right side of history, as opposed to the part of my life where I'm getting reviewed in the arts pages for doing this show that's at Battersea Arts Centre or whatever. So I've definitely experienced that, yeah, for sure.
And can I just ask, because Believers, you know, we did make an adaptation of that for television. Do you think that gave that show the presence for it, the pieces, the central arguments of it, a bigger, a broader audience? Were you aware of it having reached communities that might not have known to come and see it in a theatre space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, and that's you know, it was one of the really interesting things artistically for me when we were making that adaptation happen, right? Like, you know, I'm an artist who I take form very seriously. I want I choose the form in which I'm expressing the idea because I think these things have an interplay with each other. And obviously screen is a different form to live theatre, right? Like there's a bunch of stuff you can do in a theatre and vice versa you can't do on TV. And one of those things you can do on TV is you can just get in more people's houses, right? That's a thing you can definitely do. And we could see it from the numbers and stuff, you know. So that was, and it's super interesting because it meant that in some ways, you probably remember these conversations, right? You know, one of the big notes that we were receiving was people can just turn on to this halfway through, you know. And of course, as a theatre director, your immediate response is to like throw your drink at someone and tell them that they'll come when you tell them to come, right? But that's not how TV works. And so there was this amazing like push and pull of like, well, you're letting people in a different way, which maybe means you're going to have to let go of some stuff, do you know what I mean, that you were doing in theatre. But the payoff is more people get to see what you're doing.
Yeah, it was, yeah, there were lots of, very interesting conversations around the content that was referenced from online as well, yes, about what you can and can't put on a broadcast platform that you can happily put on stage in a theatre. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Cathy, can I come to you next? So we worked with you when you created the very beautiful film that you saw a clip of there, Sign Night. That was during the first COVID lockdown, all that long time ago, commissioned by The Space and the BBC. At the time, we talked about that when you were making the work, but can you just explain to me why you thought it was so important at the time that a really broad mainstream audience could see that film, and do you think it achieved that?
It was an amazing experience. So 5 years ago, we created something very unusual in really challenging circumstances, and had lots of layers of technically challenging to project onto buildings through the use of sign language in a way it hadn't been done before, but also the storytelling within the work was quite radical. It brought in politics. There was a political story within there because at the time there was someone who was suing Boris Johnson because he was refusing to include sign language interpreters within his public announcements. And so that kind of meaning that at the end of the world, sorry, deaf and disabled people, you're not welcome, you're not important in this moment. And it had a very strong, profound, there were other elements about COVID which really revealed the fragile position that disabled people have in this community. And the reality is that we're all potentially disabled people. There's no them and us. We are all within that definition. So that means we need to function in a world which understands disability as part of everyday life. What's happening in America now, I think, really brings this issue to the fore, and where they're abolishing and closing down departments which have been put in place to encourage disabled, deaf-led innovation. I mean, in a really simple sense, I mean, text phones were invented by deaf people, and not many people know that. So one of the most profound impacts on our digital culture, which is text communication, was actually led by deaf people many, many years ago. And also subtitles on the TV, another example, was led by deaf activism in the 1970s. So the reason why we have captions on the TV was led by deaf activism. So the idea that deaf and disabled people are kind of in the way, or a kind of a thing that's a burden rather than a movement of people which have radical ideas that can improve the function of this world, is something that still isn't fully understood. And there's a movement in America now to try and eradicate what is seen as wasteful investment. But that goes to show that there's still an issue in society around that. So within my work, what I'm trying to do is I've set up a company after Sign Night. So I'm now the artistic director of Spectroscope. And our aim is to bring multi-layered storytelling of deaf perspective, disabled storytelling to wider audiences. And we started doing that by literally beaming stories onto buildings. So just literally creating gigantic projections in spaces where people are not expecting it. Busy town centres, very popular light festivals. We repeated a version of Sign Night in the Bristol Light Festival, and that was seen by about 180,000 people. And what was really interesting, it was really loved, because it's a very joyful piece of work and a very deep piece of work. So people engage with it intellectually and emotionally, and that surprises them. And I think within our storytelling, we're just trying to keep that, at the heart of everything we do. And within my own practice, I've always had a struggle in terms of people wanting to hear my story, because as soon as they find out I'm deaf, they think, oh, this person's got nothing to bring to the table for me, because that's my sole purpose in life, to wear a hearing aid, to sign. So they don't think I've got ideas or contacts or things that are going to bring something exciting to their life. So I've always had to fight for my place at the table, to be somebody who has value. And it's really interesting at the moment, I'm somebody who's commissioned me. So we're doing a massive projection in Liverpool next month, which is really exciting, on the Cunard building. And somebody's trying to pitch me for a major broadcaster interview. And they need to kind of try and explain me, because my story arc is too complex. So when you're deaf and disabled, you need to have a very simple story. So you need to acquire the disability. You need to overcome it. And then you need to land somewhere really wholesome and very satisfying and inspiring. So you need to have that moment you reach. And that needs to be it, basically. You need to have those three elements. But of course, I've had a kind of very varied career. I've done lots of different things. I have different views and things to say about the world in lots of different areas, for example, climate change. And so when people present me, I have to make a choice. Do I get rid of all of that and try and make this concept of me really simple? Or do I show the authentic me and hope that eventually someone might want to hear that story? so far, it's only people like the space who've wanted that. So there's a struggle to allow deaf and disabled people to be multifaceted human beings. So there are deaf and disabled people who are refugees, or people who have had to navigate extremely complex, social political issues in their lives, and they have all of these things that are part of who they are. They're really asked beyond, so can you have a chat about your access needs, and how we can make our things more accessible for you. So there's a very limited, intellectually starved of the right to contribute to wider conversations. But through our work, we are succeeding simply through the power and the joy of what it brings to spaces. In the Science Gallery at the moment in London, you can see a work that we've created which is exploring climate change through the deaf perspective. So the idea that deaf and disabled people are part of the heroes that save the world is something we all need to embrace. I believe we are part of the story. And of course, deaf and disabled people have to adapt every day, every single day, in a multitude of ways. So of course, they are the people we should be thinking about in terms of advice about what to do when this world changes in a way we can't deal with. They kind of do that already. So we're kind of experts in these situations, in crises. So in London, we've created a piece where we're presenting a place that has been formulated by deaf experience. And it's joyful and exciting and uplifting, and that's a shock for audiences, because normally climate change is always represented through dystopian, scorched earth kind of visions. So the idea that deaf people would create something that actually is the place you want to arrive at is quite powerful for people to see. So I feel excited, fearful, excited at the same time. What's happening out there right now about the feeling that deafness and disability is wasteful, is still kind of there. This kind of thing that people have to do out of kindness is still there. But there's also a movement of people out there who are trying to present and share work which shows actually we're vital to society and how it functions and how it grows and how it adapts, and innovation. So it's really something that really drives me and what we're doing right now. Yeah.
It is interesting, isn't it, that there is a difficulty when translating your art to the media to see you as an artist, first and foremost, an artist who then makes a work that focuses on the deaf and disabled lived experiences of the beginning of COVID. The very first time I ever spoke to Cathy was the first time in the beginning of the COVID lockdown, and it was when we were debating whether the masks were going to become compulsory, mandatory. And, everyone was in a panic. And I remember talking to Cathy about it, who kind of went, that is horrifying for deaf people to hear, that this is being talked about. We all understand what's going on and the unknowns in this, but that a government would just choose to put in place legislation or insist. And suddenly, and the point that Cathy made to me that literally nearly kind of made me burst into tears was for small children who have not yet learned to sign, who are underconfident, deaf children, underconfident in the public domain because of all of the challenges around them. This is just like telling them to stay home, don't go out. And it was the first time I thought, why is Cathy having to say that to me? Why is that not occurring to me? And then really interestingly for me with Sign Night as a piece was then the other side of it, which is that the choreography of the sign language is beautiful. And I think when Cathy was talking about the piece having been displayed in other settings since then, and people who don't necessarily know the context of the work at all, I think they're just captivated by something that is beautifully choreographed. And then they start to think. But Cathy, do you think the fact that piece was shown on television. Did that help to kind of, open up? Did you have conversations? Were you aware of people taking away from that something that they hadn't bothered to think about before?
Yeah, I think so. I think the art form you're talking about is something called VV. It's called Visual Vernacular, which is an art form exclusive to the deaf community, where it's a mixture of sign language and poetry. So it's an art form in itself. And that carries a visual, it's like a visual superpower art form, but it's extremely marginalised. So it was hugely significant for that to be shown on television and then to be shown in public at festivals, with general public. People never go to art galleries, with watching VV on the buildings like that. So that was, really crucial. But I think sign language itself has a great power for, the wider population. It has the way in which we communicate has become really restricted and limited. And you know that young people are struggling with communication because through the digital media they're not challenging themselves to go out and have face-to-face conversations anymore. Whereas through sign language, you are using the whole of your body and you're connecting with people and you're doing it with confidence and clarity. And sign language is definitely a language that we need to preserve. There are 300 sign languages around the world, so it's not an international language. But if I go to Mexico and I bump into a deaf person on the street, I can have a conversation with them because we have a shared understanding of good communication. And so even though we have totally different sign languages, we can have chat. and that has happened. I've been in Mexico where I've bumped into someone on a bus and had a very long chat with them. So the deaf people, I believe, are superior communicators. So rather than people who are, unfortunately, trapped in a silent world, they are more advanced communicators and able to portray a very multi-layered, complex emotional understanding of what's going on in our world. So it's really, really critical we hold on to it. But the museums are empty of sign language culture. Do you know the history of sign language, when it was invented, who the activists were, who have, formed these, versions of sign language that are expressed through poetry and other art forms? No, because the museums are empty of sign language culture. The libraries are empty of books. There are a few coming through, but not many. So really, generally, our society still really excludes us in a way of being just that little person on the screen you see who pops up on the news. There he is again. Oh, it's that guy who does the news. So that's as far as we take it. Or that whole spectrum of experience that has been, goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, is just not present. And so it's really critical through broadcasting and those methods that this starts to come out from where it's hiding.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Laura because she's been sitting patiently on a screen there, and I guess I'm going to talk to that camera to talk to Laura, which is weird because you're behind me, Laura, but I'm going to look that way to ask you my question. As a playwright, Laura, your work is often about the kind of complexities of what it means to be human, and I know that, as with many writers, you draw on your own personal lived experiences, but your work is not intended to be kind of autobiographic. When you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, you said that you felt there'd been a shift where, a little bit like Cathy is saying, that there's a need when you do come into the kind of media spotlight, when you're trying to get focus on the work you're presenting, the interest is now increasingly sort of prurient. It wants you to tell your personal story rather than you wanting to be able to just take some lived experience and apply it to a broader narrative. Can you sort of respond to that, Laura? It's very weird having you behind me.
I'm sorry I can't be there. I'd rather be there in person. But, yeah, the play I have on at the moment, Many Faces, is about eyes of a woman who's
Indeed, and it's interesting to me, it's similar themes to those that Cathy talked about, which is people not wanting to just let you speak as an artist who has a perspective on storytelling and what you're trying to achieve with your storytelling, but wanting to see the personal in that situation. And Laura, you won't mind my saying that we also know you and work with you in the past because you've done some amazing PR. So you've sat on the other side of this particular discussion. But have you seen from that side, you know, the pressures that are on journalists or, you know, kind of commentators in the media to kind of find these slightly more sound-bitey, formulaic kind of responses? And do you think maybe they struggle with putting storytellers who they don't quite know where you're going to head when they ask you a question on a screen or in a newspaper? Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Corey, I'm making you wait till last, which is not something he likes. But Corey, with Antarctica First Dance, you took your choreography to a very, very remote part of the world, a very cold part of the world. How long were you allowed to film with that poor woman before she had to be put back into more clothing?
I think it was like 30 seconds.
30 seconds, yeah. 30 seconds of dance and then quickly put her back into a puffer jacket. But it's really interesting. The threat of climate change has kind of featured in quite a few of your works. How do you see your role as an artist in telling stories about subjects like that that can help move the dial for audiences when they're really big, intractable problems like climate change? What do you see? I mean, obviously you see the importance of an artist doing that, but do you think it has an impact and an effect?
Yes and yes. Done. Good. That's it. There's your soundbite. I think, in short, it's twofold for me. One, it's really selfish, is that as a human on this planet, and also someone who works as artist, a choreographer, creative director, whatever, my life is very, we create, and we create. Specifically in dance, it's quite a lot of carbon. And it got to a point where, we were making so much, I was like, I'm part of the problem. And then sort of selfishly, I guess, as a human, I wanted to figure out how I could contribute to the climate crisis through what I do in my job and as an individual. And that was sort of the thing that allowed me to question how we could go about that. And then also, from a really practical art-making point of view, yeah, I think art can help change or shift perspectives, soften hearts, soften minds, get a hook in. I think often we, the cultured bunch, who are so lucky to be in culture and embrace it, take for granted that some people don't get that and don't see that and don't witness that, and how profound telling a topic through art can shift someone's perspective. I would say that now maybe that's slightly different as well. Like when you've got world leaders or a lot of noise in newspapers and a lot of crap going on, sometimes anything that's a bit ambiguous or vague, I don't want anything to do with it. I want the hard facts. I want science, and I just want to be told what's real in this world of bull crap. So there is also that dichotomy that I now struggle with, which I think is I probably felt that 8 years ago when we made that film, and why we've ended with the facts. It was like, here's the art, make some emotion, no connection. Bam, the world's ended, y'all. Do something about it. Ending, not ended. So, yes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Great.
no, indeed.
Cool.
Many years ago, I was part of a charity being set up called Cape Farewell, which was taking artists and scientists and marine biologists to the Arctic in a wooden sailing boat where everybody had to help keep the boat afloat. It did have Kevlar hulls so that if it hit the iceberg, it wouldn't sink. But the founder of that organisation, David Buckland, was the first person who said, climate is culture. It's not, so therefore you do need artists telling those stories, because the appeal to people, the appeal to change their behaviour is going to come from them recognising something that they are impacting and that they can impact positively and maybe impacting negatively. So I think it does still doing that. And because that soundbite culture that you're talking about, that kind of information overload, is that really helping us shape ideas about what the solutions might be?
It's true, because also maybe that's an individual point of view where I'm like, I do feel it, and now I want facts. But I guess art can give facts, art can give pathways, ideas, concepts, but I guess what we're identifying is it's maybe one of the best things to go, like, you know, when you listen to a piece of music or just really practically, it worked on me. I went to Antarctica and I created this piece of art and I got invested in the concept of climate change. And from that, on a personal level, I don't wear jeans anymore. I don't wear denim. I became a vegetarian. I have a water bottle. I have a keep cup. All of these things, a lot of us probably already do. Sadly, a lot of the world don't do, right? And it was because I got emotionally invested in the concept through art that I was able to change my mind and develop individually on this topic specifically. So if that can be applied to multiple topics, then great.
Thank you. I'd like to make the discussion sort of four-way now, let you all respond to one another. So I'm just going to put a question out there, which is that we obviously are, nobody's going to deny that when we are living in troubled times, we're facing issues that, you know, that we didn't previously see coming towards us. Perhaps we should have anticipated them. So in these troubled times, do you agree that art, culture, artists' voices are becoming more siloed and taken less seriously in terms of being part of that bigger debate around what the potential solutions might be? Anyone can answer, including you, Laura.
I would agree. Yeah, I noticed I work in a different way now, and I notice when I do a job and engage with the marketing department, it's all about a soundbite, and it's all about what is the meme or the TikTok or the element of this you and this story or this project that you're trying to tell. We recently did like a PR review. Gosh, I feel really loud. Could be quiet, I'm so sorry. I think recently my love life has had more articles than my work or me as an artist, which is insane to me to think about. Like, why is that? And therefore and in the work that I'm trying to create as well is being manipulated by this as a concept. It's being dictated, it needs to work for TikTok. Oh, it needs to become a meme. Oh, it needs to be this. And I think that is a problem.
I agree with what you were saying there, Corey, and just, what I'd probably add to that, if that's all right, is I would say that I think for sure that's true. I think that, but I think that sense of artists, and what do I mean when I say that? Probably something that we all mean. You were talking about the relationship between sort of art and facticity or something like this. I suppose what I mean is those of us who make work about the world where ambiguity, form, so not just content, but also form in some broad degree, artifice in some substantive way is the way that we communicate with the world. And I absolutely take your point about that question of the facticity of it. And I think it's really, I sometimes joke with people, my work is very, very political. I always say, what I never want to make is agitprop, because apart from anything else, theatre is an incredibly complicated and inefficient way of trying to get people to agree with you. Like, you might just talk to them, man. Like, do you know what I mean? You don't need to spend all this money and negotiate with equity on when tea time is. Just tell them. And so that sense of, when I'm thinking about when we say like how we're contributing as an artist and are we siloed, I think of those, I suppose, those bits. That's when before I was saying I think there's something important that artists do. I'm not saying artists save democracy on themselves. That's laughable. I'm saying there's something necessary, a necessary part of it that they do. And I think that necessary part is to do with that, just very, to be very clear, a lot of the political extremism, a lot of the assaults on democracy we see, of whichever particular political stripe, are built, it seems to me, by mobilizing fairly, let's say, sterile and rigid notions of identity, right? Whatever that identity is. Well, as artists, like, we literally pretend things are real that aren't real. So if anyone's going to have a way of being more playful with identity, of showing where the porous borders are, it's going to be us. And I think, I just want to land a couple of related points about this, and then I'll sort of hand on to colleagues. But so this question of saying artists being siloed, too often as artists we commit a bit of a sin, right? Because it's hard making art. You need money, you need people to say yes or whatever. So sometimes we come to spaces like this and we find it easy to get into a weak place. They won't give us what we need and so on. Well, listen, the headline is there are a number of artists who are super successfully breaking out of those silos. The big ticket item in terms of just shit I'm into would be the Blind Boy podcast, one of the biggest podcasts in the world. A guy who's like a surreal rapper. I'm sure you guys know it, right? Absolutely brilliant podcast, tens of thousands of downloads. In a sort of smaller way, we did a podcast a couple of years ago that was doing like 5,000-6,000 downloads. We did like 8 off of only 8 episodes. You know, there's a number of different ways people are circumventing that stuff and getting out of silos. But here's the thing, we're at our best when we collaborate together. And that same lack of ambition that we see in terms of what it might mean to break out of our silos in broadcast, in print, we also see in theatre and dance, right? Do you know what I mean? We also see it in theatre and dance because I think we're at a point where the leadership of a lot of, broadly speaking, the creative sector, people are panicking. Budgets are tighter. You cut and you cut and you cut. And ultimately, the theatre way of putting it is, ultimately, you cut everything else. What you're cutting now, you're cutting programme, you're cutting risk, you're cutting the point of what it is we do. But I just want to leave you on this thought. I want to leave you with something very, very stark that's come to me increasingly from colleagues, especially in the United States. My company works a lot in the US. And increasingly, whether it's writers, whether it's journalists, whether it's theatres we collaborate with, one of the things I hear, and I think this will strike a chord with all of us, one of the things I hear is people say to me, oh, over the past few years, I felt there was stuff we should have been doing, but I thought we couldn't do it. There was stuff I wanted to say about what I thought was going wrong, but I didn't feel like I could say it. You know, there was change I wanted to try to affect, but I felt like these other things were going around me and there was no way I could give it that shake. Lord knows what direction this country is going in over the next 4 or 5 years. I think our job is to not, on the other side of that, say, I wish there was this thing I could have done. I think now's the time to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cathy.
Just doing an interpretive.
Sorry.
So if you bear with me. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think for me it's actually a difficult question to answer because I'm going through a year where things are happening for me that haven't happened in the past. So, for example, I've got a major piece of work in the Science Gallery in London and next to significant internationally respected artists in the fields of climate change. Like, wow. If you'd asked me that would happen a few years ago, I'd go, no, it's not going to happen. And also I have a work coming soon that will be shown at the Welcome collection. So that's a really significant thing to happen. And so that shows to me there is a change in attitude as to the work that we're creating, where it sits in public discourse from a curatorial viewpoint. Because curators in a room with a disabled person was the coldest place to be a few years ago. You know, they wouldn't know what to do with this. So now that there's this shift, this kind of feeling that actually you need a place in our program, you're an essential part of this theme that we're exploring this year, is really different. And there's also some major things happening this year. So the BBC are releasing a prime-time drama in April, which has been written and conceived by a completely deaf team. That's going to be really interesting because the target audience for that is international. It's a commercial project. They're expecting to sell this series to, you know, broadcasters around the world and make a profit. So that's really significant. So it's really interesting to see what happens. But what isn't quite there, so even though I'm getting these big opportunities on a certain platform, I'm still, for example, the press views are hilarious. So all the other artists get these science writers and these so-and-so and these art, you know, journalists, they all, and I'm standing there with my interpreter you know, eating the cake, waiting, because none of them want to talk to me. So there's still, I think, a lack of overall kind of embracement, you know. Yeah, there's still this big step that needs to be taken. But I do see some positive changes, and when I get my foot in the door, I'm bringing a whole entourage with me. So when the Welcome Collection asked me to be a consultant curator and also an artist, I said yes. And here are my friends. And I brought a whole load of other people, which they've loved. They're loving it. But it was quite funny. And so I do try, whenever these things happen, to create kind of a legacy beyond that point. But you feel a certain obligation to do that. So it's not just, when really it should be about you and your work, you do feel like this might be the only chance. So I've got to make it really like everything. So you tend to be doing a little bit more than you really should do. But yeah.
Thank you. And it's interesting, there's a theme there, I think, from you and Javad absolutely as well, which is this shouldn't when I the minute I asked the question about do you feel like artists are being siloed, I kind of thought that's exactly the wrong tone for this, because I think what I was trying to say at the beginning is this is about, we just don't have, I think, a particularly good dialogue going on, just regular conversations with mainstream media, with other people to just talk about, you know, the benefits of our storytellers, our artists kind of being featured in more kind of mainstream context, telling their stories, that, you know, these are people, as you've seen from the conversation today, these are 4 artists who are very expert in many things, not just in the art that they put out in the world. And so actually, don't you want to have some of their insight and their opinion when you're looking at subjects that seem almost insurmountable? So I think it is about framing this positively and saying, what's the opportunity for dialogue? And I think that's very much where the space is coming from, in saying we're only, you know, we are doing what we're doing, but we just want to open this debate up and get a wider discussion about what the opportunities might be for how to showcase art and artists to the betterment of everyone's lives, I think. Laura, did you have anything that you would like to add? If not, I'm going to ask people for questions from the audience online and the audience in the room. Absolutely, and it's interesting. My executive producer, who's in the audience there, and I have been working with various artists on short pieces. The clip that you saw of Javad is one of the pieces that we've been working on. Just sort of saying, you know, if you had a minute and a half, 2 minutes, you know, what would you want to say to that mainstream audience? And we were having conversations with various people about that, and one in particular, a choreographer, who has their own dance company, and he and his partner have 3 small children. I don't think that helps define who that person was. And we were having that conversation about that kind of wanting artists to be visible, because actually they then inspire other people to do that. And the partner said, yeah, it's really interesting with 3 small children. If any of them came to she and her husband, to suggest that they might want to be a dancer or a choreographer. She said, hand on heart, I'm going to have to tell you, I'm going to try and discourage them because it's too hard. And then she kind of went, and I can't believe I just said that. So there is something, I think, that, you know, where we as where artists as a sector do feel. I mean, Corey, you talked about this, that, you know, you said when we worked with you, it wasn't easy to kind of get money for projects, but you did know where and how to present an idea and get funding to make a film project, but that you would really struggle to know how to do that today.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's the fight, isn't there? When you're anyone, whether it's, you know, you want to buy a house or buy a new piece of clothing, when you really want something, you figure out how to do it, right? And I think artists specifically have the tenacity of a toddler. And sorry, yeah, is that right? Yeah, or a bulldog. Is that better? I don't know. Whatever. We will get shit done, right? And I think when you do, you can. In that time, I also feel like there was probably more climate funding available as well, possibly. That was like on an opportunistic point of view. But yeah, for now I don't know if it's, I don't know how it's happened, but I don't really produce films or work anymore. I get hired to go work on TV and film and shows. And I don't remember the last thing I made individually as a company. And I would be actually a bit scared to figure out how to do that again. I'm sure, you know, we could do it. We would figure it out, sure. But I feel like the opportunities have, there's more of us as well, and the opportunities have got smaller. And in a layer of that, the way that we communicate is different, and what people want is different. The sound bites on, you know, people want me to make TikToks. People do, yeah.
They're wonderful. Are there any questions from the audience? I know that would be good to hear from anybody or anyone online. Sam, have you got any questions? She's down there with a microphone.
Not at the moment, but it would be nice to have some audience questions.
Anybody got any questions for the panel? John.
Oh.
Thanks. It was a question for Cathy, actually. Just on that tipping point you described, Cathy, of your work suddenly getting wider, the sort of Wellcome Trust, the Science Museum. What was behind that, do you think? Is that a few key individuals, curators suddenly becoming more aware, or was there something else that led to that, that sudden change?
Well, the change happened because of the Space Commission. So what it did was created proof of concept, and then the next step was the work was picked up by the Bristol Light Festival in 2022, which is a very mainstream, populist Instagramming, like, woohoo, colourful light festival. So it's a very politically charged, emotional work within a mainstream, happy festival. And that was really striking, and it commanded an enormous audience and enormous engagement. So that it attracted the attention, and it expanded people's understanding of where deaf and disability experience sits within their minds and their programs. Because prior to that, it was very, very focused on access, the provision of sign language interpreters and of captions, and this is all important, of wheelchair access and all of these things, and these have value, but if your exhibitions are empty of the stories of those people you're providing access to, then it is meaningless. It's meaningless. So that was what was missing. The history, the discourse, the political activism, the journeys, you know, it's missing. The people who chained themselves to buses in the 80s so that we could get lifts and buildings, do we know about them? No, because they're not in mainstream museums. There are no memorials to the work that they did. So we're missing, we're kind of literally not there. So what changed through that work was just the power of it and how it held people, and it holds people's attention, and people left feeling different. And the original work, people have said to me, oh, that influenced me, it changed me. So there's artists who are not deaf and disabled people who watched that work and they thought, oh, that really opened my mind and my thinking. So that idea that it reaches people in lots of different levels. So that's where it's come from, very much from there. And the Wellcome Collection, I think, are excited. They're not doing this because they think, oh, we need to tick that box. They're doing it because they genuinely believe this is going to be a great show for their audiences, that people are going to come and see this. And I'm working across the whole organisation, the marketing, the comms, the front of house. So it's a project that's uplifting the whole organisation in a positive way. So I think that's what's happened. It's not this kind of, oh, we've got to sort that out. We've got to find the money to pay for the interpreters. You know, that kind of energy that previously existed. And I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
And Corey, can I ask you, because on that same thing, in that same series of films, Swan Lake Bath Ballet.
Yes, which is my catalyst, I think.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Actually, every interview I do, that always does come up, I must say. It's like the space commissioned me to create, it was COVID?
Yeah, it was, yeah. Culture and quarantine.
A film during COVID, which is obviously quite difficult to come up with. It was right at the beginning, before there was lots of dance COVID films. We were the first. Well, we weren't the first, but we were one of the first. And we did 27 dancers around the world dancing in their bathtubs, a 3-minute version of Swan Lake. And if I'm going to be really honest, I thought like 100 dancers would watch it. And that would be that. And it was a nice project to keep us busy, keep us sane during COVID. But it actually became trending news. It trended on Twitter. It's on like 25 million views or more in total. I think it's still BBC Art's most viewed dance program of all time. And yeah, it did really, really well. And it was one of those moments that it was a proof of concept. Antarctica was before, which was a proof of concept to be able to do Swan Lake, and then Swan Lake became a proof of concept to do other dance films, and then, you know, now I've been working with Tim Burton for the last few years, making TV shows and movies and working for Warner Brothers and doing all of that because of this initial belief and opportunity from the space and that connection with audiences and streamers, BBC, and platforms and news outwards. If I didn't have all of that press and that exposure, the climb to what I'm doing now would have been, I don't know how I would have done it, to be honest.
It's an interesting one. I'm going to put Natalie on the spot there because the Swan Lake Bath Ballet did have a bit of a corollary, didn't it, in the next series, if Sam can get you the microphone, in terms of it actually going out on BBC socials.
Oh, yeah. So Culture in Quarantine, both Cathy's Beautiful Sign Night and Swan Lake Bath Ballet were in the first Culture in Quarantine series, which were 25 pieces in COVID Lockdown 1. And BBC Arts were very generous with their social media platforms, and all the works were available to view in full on the social channels. We later on did a second Culture in Quarantine, I think the year later, 2021, and at that time, understandably, with other streaming platforms, the BBC wanted to push people to iPlayer, but what that meant is there was only a tiny trail of the pieces before audiences were pushed to iPlayer. And what we saw was that we lost a lot of audiences, and the kind of numbers that Corey's talking about and the kind of totally game-changing moments for these amazing artists, it was not necessarily possible the second time around, because audiences, as we know, audiences like to stick within their platforms and they don't want to migrate from one to another. And I think in terms of strategy, we lost something the second time.
Absolutely. And in some ways, that's what I'm saying, is I think that this isn't about anybody having deliberately done something. You know, this is about needing to just have those conversations with kind of mainstream media, with broadcasters, to kind of identify what the opportunities are. You know, we do still have, you know, a public service broadcasting system in the UK for which we should hang on very tightly. And, you know, and what's important, I think, is to look at what that benefits us, because it is local. In radio and television terms, it is national, and it is still, to this day, a trusted kind of set of outlets. And I sort of feel like partly there just needs to be more conversation between both creative industries, cultural sector, and our broadcast and other media outlets to see what the partnership opportunities might be in a new world, not the Sam, are you all right there?
Yes, we've got a question. Which is quite fitting with what you are talking about right now. We're being asked, what would help you feel better networked with people across the mainstream media, whether that's broadcast and press?
Yeah, who'd like to take that one? No, come on, Jamal, you're going to take it. Come on. Then give the other two time to catch up.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, I mean, I don't feel unnetworked, to be honest with you. If anything, what I was trying to tilt at before was a feeling that there are senses of, there are substantial senses in which my friends and colleagues, my closest friends and colleagues who are in the, what used to be the print media, when I talk to them about what they're excited about, what the challenges are, and what they feel the pressures on trying to do things that are really interesting and important. That sounds a lot like that same constellation of factors when I talk to my friends and colleagues in the TV sort of space. That sounds almost exactly the same as when I talk to people whose most of whose work is sort of cinema adjacent. And of course it sounds almost exactly like the kind of stuff that I'm talking about with people who are in the kind of, I guess, bit of the world that I live in. So, yeah, that sort of is how I would answer that question. I suppose if anything, you know, what the point I was trying to articulate previously was just to say that sometimes, you know, hearing what Laura was saying, or in different ways what we've all spoken about, like it does seem across all those spaces that a sort of a bit of a cavalier attitude, a view that, you know, perhaps, you know, this came up in the culture in quarantine thing, right? A sort of committing to an idea that's got some radicalism in it and seeing it where it ends you up. That should be like the DNA of what all of us do across those spaces, right? But like, you know, more and more, you know, Laura might remember that because you were saying someone in London talked about an idea that you were pitching to them as being like, I can't remember what you said, not metropolitan enough or something like that. And it's like, to be honest with you, even, you know, we just, in a way, like what I'm asking for is a bit more of just the old school swagger, right? That goes, is the idea interesting? Are we all excited about it? Do we think it's going to change some stuff? If so, let's do it, man. What do we need to make it happen, you know? As opposed to that more sort of conservative and circumspect way of filtering ideas.
I also wonder if, I was just thinking, there's plenty of time to the question about what will help you feel more networked. I'm going to interpret that as being exposed to be able to talk about your art and being an artist. There's plenty of times that I absolutely want nothing to do with it, and I don't want to do an interview. It's not about me, it's about the art. So I do think we need to make a lane for that. Like, I'm thinking about Kendrick Lamar recently in the Super Bowl doing his beautiful piece of work, and the work is speaking for itself, right? And then everyone else speaking for it. That's a great example of art working in mysterious ways. Not about Drake, about everything else. And I think I'm thinking, actually, I don't want to talk to any press. I don't want this to be about me. I don't want to give you my opinion on it. I don't want to tell you about anything. You go and enjoy the art. So I think that's okay. But I think what we're trying to also say is that artists have an interesting and fantastic viewpoint on the world and can articulate things, not so much myself right now, but can articulate things in maybe a new, interesting way that creates, again, like our art, a different endpoint for people to absorb information or feel something. And I think that is something I would love to see more of. I'd love to, we were talking about this, go on a desert island discs and, you know, have more artists on that. That's a great example.
Have you got your desert island discs?
Oh,
Do you know what they are?
Yeah, I love them.
Do you change it? Do you look at
oh,
it annually?
yeah. Give me David Attenborough every day, do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, and there's a question at the back there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Rob Lawson. I work here at BCU in the College of English and Media. And I've been here for 16 years now, and over the course of my career, I've seen really talented students in literature and creative writing produce some spectacular work over the course of their degree, who finish their degree, who would like to pursue a career in the creative industries, but find that there are very few opportunities, that businesses are not willing to invest in those particular careers. And it's really surprising to me, given the centrality of storytelling in a whole bunch of industries, whether that's video games, movies, TV shows, board games, music videos, you know, and so on. And a lot of the criticisms of those media outlets is that they tell really bad stories, actually. So there is a whole sector of young people finishing degrees who have got expertise in these areas. So what needs to happen to create opportunities for those kinds of people? Or is it a case of what Cathy said, where you just have to bang on the door hard enough and long enough to eventually get your place on the, you know, at the table, which seems to me a kind of obtuse kind of way of going about it. It feels like businesses have got all of this money and they should be investing in it. So I'm just wondering if the panel has any ideas as to sort of where that might go in the future. Thank you.
Anybody? I'm happy to respond. No, I'm happy to respond. I mean, I think that, you know, you talked about games industry and the kind of, you know, the wider broadcast sector, and obviously there are, and we can't take anything in isolation. You know, they're the same financial pressures that everyone is feeling. You know, all businesses are having to reduce their spending, and B, to kind of, you know, de-risk and go for the thing. So what is happening is you're getting a lot of repetition. The minute, you know, a movie on a theme or a TV drama series on a theme or a game on a theme comes out and is successful, then you can just sit back and watch the 10 slightly not so good copies come out, go use the same marketing assets virtually and go out there. And I think that is testimony to that. So that's exactly the thing that Javab was speaking to, which is like, if it's, you know, if you're hearing about a good story, you know, where's the risk? Where's the enthusiasm to just give somebody something, an idea, a go? And again, I think that's where it would be great to just have more conversation between the three kind of, you know, sectors that have some say in this in terms of broadcast and creative industries and culture, to kind of talk together, because what the cultural sector definitely has is some brilliant storytellers who don't always get the opportunities to tell their stories as widely as they might well do. But I think it's, you know, we have to recognise the kind of the world that we're in and the pressures that lots of these sectors are in. I mentioned at the beginning, you know, that there is this huge cut in factual commissioning, and that for me is a really strange thing. I didn't see that coming, you know, but that comes straight out of the kind of the streaming, the kind of box set culture. You know, we have now created a culture that says a new drama series is something that drops, and I don't see anyone for a whole weekend because I'm just going to sit and greedily down every single episode of it. Well, the streamers, you know, got into the market by doing that. Has anyone seen them dropping an entire box set of a new drama series? No, because they've suddenly realized that's an incredibly expensive habit they've started to inculcate in an audience, and they can't afford to maintain it. But they've shifted the whole broadcast landscape by doing it, so that now all the other broadcasters are having to rush to trying to come with these kind of, you know, blockbuster dramas, and the impact has been that factual commissioning spend is down. That means that the more discursive, more factually based human stories are the ones that are being kind of moved to one side, and I think that's a huge, huge shame, a great loss to the kind of, you know, to the variety of storytelling that we'd want to see on our screens. But as I say, that isn't any one broadcaster that's done that. That's, you know, we're just as guilty. I binged a box set along with The Best of Us. So, but it is interesting to see the impact that's had.
But one more question as well, because we're running out of time. Sorry, I probably have to take one more question in the room. But we've had a question online, which is a very interesting one. Obviously, today we're talking to this wonderful panel, and you're all, established mainstream artists and storytellers in the room. There's been a question about what advice would you offer those aspiring, upcoming artists and storytellers who don't have the same kind of reach or platforms you have, and especially the diverse artists and storytellers that really need that kind of support. So is there any advice you can offer them?
Brilliant. I'm going to everyone in turn.
Well, I also think it may answer the earlier question twofold, is that I think I come from a poor background. I'm fiercely queer. I've got crazy ADHD. I feel that, up until recently, everything has been such a struggle. It's been like climbing a ladder, knocking on a door, tearing things down, being a pit bull whilst dressed like a puppy dog, changing myself to be able to get in the right door, speak to the right person. I remember going, anyway, yeah, I could give you 1,000 anecdotes for the real struggle that it is to get anything on, or to create anything, or to just survive wanting to be creative. So it's rough because I dare sound like a Tory, is that it's like, you kind of gotta fight, and you've gotta, it's not every man for themselves, and we don't say that anymore, but in terms of I do feel passionately that you should feel passionate about what you do, and there should be kind of hyper-focus, hyper-tunnel vision, and if you want that to happen, we've all made that happen in different ways and at different beats, and you go up and you go down, you go up and you go down. So yeah, I think keep going. And I also think maybe, like I benefited from a few schemes, and I don't know if these schemes still go on, but there was lots of placement schemes. Like I remember having people from in Birmingham help support me. They were young, and they got paid a very small amount from the government to be able to, or the city council or someone, I can't remember, gosh, I'm going to go to hell. And they came in and worked with us and supported, and we benefited from that, and they benefited from that. Yeah.
Cathy.
I think a lot of people who are trying to achieve a path in the arts are set back through the trauma they experienced on the way there. So that means that they experience rejection. This is everybody in the arts, so they experience rejection, people not understanding the concepts of their work and so on. And so they go through trauma, and that means you have to keep recovering from that trauma, and that can hold you back. So one of the key things that I've had to learn is how to react in a situation where I experienced rejection. And one of the things that's really helped me is, you're not ready for me yet. But you will be. So you're not ready, but you will be. So this place, this gallery, this person is not ready for me. So rather than it being me at fault, it's the other person who needs to sort themselves out. And it just gives you a certain level of confidence that you will continue. And the other thing is also looking after yourself when these things don't work. And to get really good at what you do, you have to fail many, many times. And many, many times. So I became a CLAW fellow a few years ago, and I thought I was going on this so I'd learned from all these great leaders about how brilliant they all are and how expert they are on their jobs. And I went around having cups of tea with all these magnificent leaders, and yet the reality was they were just telling me all of their glorious failures and a long list of people they would never work with again. And so I realized, I see. the people that are successful are just really good at failing. And that was another thing that I learned. So these are things that have happened quite recently to me, you know. So I think I don't know how helpful that is, but I do think having a healthy amount of compassion for yourself when you're trying to get somewhere, that gives and find the key to you that helps you remind yourself, I'm good, my ideas are good, they're not ready, but I'm going to keep going. It's a really important thing to find.
Self-belief. Absolutely. Laura, any final words of wisdom from you?
I mean, I'm still relatively early career. I just started, I'm in my 40s now, I just started late.
I think it's a really lovely question when you were asking about you as that established artists who actually are part of the establishment. I was like, oh, you guys, really? That's brilliant. No, but it's all I can really say is stuff that has been helpful for me, some of which is being reflected already. I didn't get into making theatre for a living until I was 27. I was a youth worker before I did that in the city I grew up in. I also did I did an MA, but in a completely irrelevant to this conversation field, and you work with what you've got, right? So because I'd been a youth worker, I knew how to do really cool participation projects, and I knew how to raise funds. So I set up a theatre company making participatory theatre in Bradford. I did that I was artistic director for about 5 years. I raised the money never needed a penny from the Arts Council for that 5 years. Made a series of shows in youth centres and stuff where I could just, I didn't have to wait for my first gig writing a play. I could just be like, oh, who's going to write this? Javard will write this. And just rattle through this stuff. So just use what you've got is one really, really important thing, and which I think strikes with what Laura was saying about you don't have to be like, oh, and one day I'll be a true artist, and the part of me which was there before will go. That's, you know what I mean? You're building the same thing that you're trying to do. I think another interesting thing to hold in mind is especially if you come from a non-traditional background, you might feel like you have to change lots to be a successful artist or a leader in this sector. The thing about trying to be someone else is that you will only ever be a second-rate version of them, and that's something a conversation I and a lot of other people have had with ourselves, right? But at least you can be a first-rate version of you. I think a crucial tiny point is you definitely don't need to go to London to make it anymore. In fact, there's a whole bunch of cities where getting going is an easier time doing that than it is in London. And the final thing is, more people than you think. I can speak probably for I guess artists of colour of a certain generation, or a certain vibe of us, kind of in terms of ethnic minority artists. More people than you would think, who if you look up to them or think their work is interesting or they've had an interesting journey, more than you think, if you drop them a line, will actually get back to you. Those are the 4 things I would say.
Brilliant. I'm going to have to call it quits now, but thank you to the panellists, and thank you.